Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for what you're doing. Can I just run through a couple of questions here back and forth? One is just on this issue about a hearing of children being recycled across the border, coming across with multiple different adults at different time periods. Is that true? Is that happening? Can you give me any details on that?
Thank you, Senator. It is true. It is happening. We've had multiple cases, one out of Chicago, one out of Charleston on that issue. And just on Monday, we announced a dedicated effort with Homeland Security investigators deploying to both El Paso and Rio Grande Valley, where most of our families are crossing, really focused on this issue. We have forensic interviewers. We're bringing DNA, rapid DNA capability in a pilot format to try to make sure we are identifying those that do not have a parent or guardian relationship, and that we're able to see if a child has been crossed twice with a different adult. That is the worst concern that we have, trafficking or child smuggling being involved in this process. We're also trying to identify those families that are presenting as a parent or guardian that are not actually parent or guardian, and the fraud issue that's intrinsic there.
Some of the construction of some of the fencing at this point has raised my attention only on the issue of some of the waivers that are around it, especially around the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. That was put in place and stated it cannot be waived unless specifically waived in statute. There's been some conversation about whether it's being waived or not being waived, whether the Religious Freedom Restoration Act is being waived for new construction, but it's not being explicitly, but it refers to a previous waiver that was never really taken away from 2007 and 8. What I'm trying to get is clarity on, is there an attempt by DHS to try to waive the Religious Freedom Restoration Act in the construction of new fencing or any construction?
I'll get back to you on that, Senator. Our waiver authority is carefully thought out. Individual segments are prepared for each additional waiver at the secretary or acting secretary level. It's been upheld multiple times at multiple levels in the federal courts, but I'll take a look at that and get back to you on that question.
I just don't see a need to try to do for new construction a waiver of the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, why that would even need to be done to be able to take that on. I'm trying to get additional clarification. I'd love to be able to come through that. There's also been some dialogue to say, when there's a large group that comes through the border, let's say 100, obviously agents have to be able to move to that. There's been some dialogue to say there is a belief or maybe an understanding or maybe factual evidence. I'd like to get clarity on this, that when a large group comes through, it demands a response from DHS authorities there, that cartels are then using that moment 5-10 miles away, knowing that there's no one in that region because they've all had to respond to a large group of families coming through to be able to then try to be able to move either people, contraband, whatever it may be across that border. Are you seeing that?
Yeah, we're absolutely seeing that. Numbers of documented instances, we call it diversion, the tactic that's employed. And just on the large group phenomenon, we had a group of 424 earlier this week, the largest we've ever seen. But what they do, the cartels control that whole access to the border. They will allow a large group to go through, knowing our agents in that area will have to respond, especially if there's a humanitarian issue with small children. We had a news crew down 2 weeks ago. They saw a pregnant woman being aided by agents on the radio, people calling out, we got runners, we got runners. The agents couldn't leave because she was complaining she was thirsty and needed help. So we had a news crew actually witness diversion in process. It is a tactic the cartels use. It's a difficult one for us. It's why we're asking for support on both the border security and the humanitarian side.
Have you seen change in percentages or in technique of people asking for asylum or claiming credible fear? Has that changed in the past several months?
It's changed in the past 7 years. I mean, before 2013, fewer than 1% of people apprehended by CBP made an asylum claim or claimed fear of return to their home country. That got as high as 30% last year. It's actually coming down because families believe they'll be released regardless of the claim they make because we're not able to hold them through their immigration proceedings.
Families are coming across the border, being processed at that point, and then being released. They're not even asking for asylum.
In some cases, that's correct. Many still are asking for asylum.
So when you say the 30% number, what I'm trying to figure out is that 30% are asking for asylum even? Or are you saying that 70% are not, or give me a guess here?
That's correct. Yeah, and again, that's for the CBP data, which I'm most familiar with. 3 weeks working on the rest of the department. So an asylum claim can be made not just necessarily at the front end when they're apprehended at the border to CBP, and that number's gone from less than 1% to 30% last year, but also to ICE later in the process in detention or to CIS. or on an affirmative basis to an immigration judge. So what we need to look at is the entire volume of people requesting asylum. How many are actually claiming fear at the front end and then filing for asylum, which they have a year to do? That number is a big gap as well. So I think to understand how this vulnerability in the system is being exploited, you have to look at that whole system.
And over the past couple of months, how many countries are crossing our border that you're apprehending?
Yeah, we every year we have upwards of 125 countries.
Has that number
national
increased?
125
Has that
countries.
increased lately, or has that stayed fairly static?
It's increased over the past decade, for sure. We do have a phenomenon of people coming from the Eastern Hemisphere all the way landing in South America and making the land journey up to our border, again, claiming fear of return to their home country.
Okay, thank you.